Hello. I run a mental health recovery page called Sane in the Asylum, which is a blog on Facebook that has followed my second year of recovery from an attempt to end my life, or which I started in my second year. And in a video today, I'm going to talk about the beginning of my mental health journey. Now, I left home when I was 17 and I settled down with a partner, and then I had my son. So my mental health recovery journey begins very shortly after I had my son. So it would have been in 2017, and he was probably 6 months old. And I think that I didn't necessarily begin my recovery journey knowingly. I didn't set out to begin that journey. I was merely on Facebook one day, or no, I was on YouTube, and I scrolled across a video of a licensed professional counselor. As many counselors, as they get on in years and they develop the experience, they like to go to educational videos and therapeutic videos, which aren't a replacement for therapy, but they are great for people who are in a self-help journey, or people who can't afford therapy, or people who are working up to therapy, which is something that I was doing, not necessarily knowingly, but I was doing it. So one day I was scrolling past and I came across one of the videos of this specific mental health counselor, and I just started watching her videos because she just piqued my interest. Something about her piqued my interest. And and then through the process of watching several of her videos, um, I discovered that she did a weekly, um, not podcast, but sit down sort of video program on Facebook. She did it weekly. And over time, I just found myself looking forward to these weekly live stream videos. And so I would sit in and I would listen to the things that she said during the week, and I would let it kind of seep in. I wasn't actively doing any work, and I wasn't actively looking to complete any kind of therapeutic work. It was just that after I had my son, I found myself in a place where I was very traumatized. And I wouldn't say that I was traumatized by the experience of giving birth, because even though I did have a difficult birth, I wasn't necessarily traumatized by that. But after I had my son and I had this very vulnerable, fragile human being in my arms, and technically the first real human being that was mine, because I helped raise a lot of siblings who were repeatedly turned against me and who I was repeatedly scapegoated to. And it hurt me a lot to have that happen. It was very traumatizing. So when I had this sweet little baby for the first time, it was my very own human being. I just kind of lost my crap. I really did. And a lot of people, they talk about the newborn days being really hard, and losing sleep and this and that. But for me, it was like I was running on pure adrenaline. Like from the moment that I brought my son home, I mean, he spent like the first week of his life in the NICU, but from the moment I brought him home, I did not sleep. They say sleep when baby sleeps, but I was it was like I could shut my eyes and go to sleep for 10 seconds, and I was fine, because looking back, I think I developed some PTSD immediately after he was born, because I have this tiny human being that I'm responsible for, and I'm scared to death that someone's going to take him away from me, or something's going to happen to him, or you know any number of things. So I would just sit up and I just watch him breathe, and I've just felt so in tune with him, like on some weird level, because he was my only human being that was mine. So when I started listening to her, and I'm not gonna I'm not going to name the counselor's name just yet, but you should keep in mind that you have no idea what kind of impact you could be making on somebody completely unknown to you, because this counselor, I still listen to them. I still go back to their videos every now and again. And in no way are they responsible for my attempt to end my life. It's just unknowingly dealing with a lot of mental health issues and not putting the proper coping mechanisms in place and not having the resources, and a combination of other life factors are what it was. But I have gone back and forth to this counselor many times just because they were the first counselor that I happened upon. And so listening to this counselor was the beginning of my mental health journey. And at first, I wasn't implementing anything new into my life. I was just allowing things to seep in because I was more receptive to them after having my son. So it's just sitting back and just letting things come in. And then I would make these connections that I hadn't had before, and I would gain this new vocabulary that I didn't have before. And I would sort of see how other experiences, because this counselor has come from a background of personal experience, which is something that I do look for in someone that I'm going to be receptive to listening to. I look for somebody who's dealt with things personally because they have a completely different take on things. So I was listening to that, and I was making connections to my own situation, and I was learning vocabulary and understanding kind of why some of these things happen. But also, I was feeling very empowered because I was listening to someone talk about things that I experienced, but also a lot of other people from her platform and from listening to her videos, they would comment in dealing with very similar situations. I mean, not exactly the same, but similar situations. And I took that as being very comforting. And though I never really participated in any of her discussions, I was listening every single week. And in the times in between, I was going to her channel and I was watching her old videos, and and that was how I was coping with some of the things that I was going through. But at the time, I didn't know that I was dealing with PTSD. I had no idea. I just knew that I couldn't sleep, that I was sitting up at night, that I was constantly anxious, that I was constantly on edge, and I was scared to death to let my son out of my sight, even around family members. My son, the whole time he was growing up, he stayed away from me 1 or 2 nights. And even now that he's almost 8 years old, it's been three nights he has stayed away from me. And that counts a sleepover with his cousin. So in 2017, a lot of things were happening. Um, Nearly a year to the day from when I dropped out of high school, which would have been in probably spring of 2016, my son was born. So spring of 2017, my son is born. And then my class, which I would have graduated with, we're graduating the very next year because I dropped out my junior year. And though I had spent so much time falling behind in school and not being able to catch up and not having any real ability to connect with peers, it was depressing for me to watch that milestone go by and to know that I wasn't a part of it, because those are moments that you don't get back. Those are experiences that you don't get back. And I wasn't too upset about it because I'm at home and I have my little baby and he's my whole world. But my mental health did suffer a little bit. I would be lying if I said that my mental health didn't suffer at all, um, because it did. It did, in knowing that um, that separation, that chasm that was formed, that was always there since I had started school between me and most of my peers, it was growing even deeper. And I had a couple of closer friends that were also going very separate ways from me, which, I mean, for anybody, that would be a little bit depressing. But it really It was the fact that for the first time in my life, I was sitting back and I was calmed down. Things were calmed down. And I was starting to see the life that I had left in order to stabilize myself was moving on without me, because that is the nature of things. Life is not going to stop for you. It doesn't matter how bad of a day you're having or what things are going on. Life is just going to keep going on. So I delved even deeper into the mental health recovery stuff because of that as well. And it was around this time that I began um, growing distant with a lot of my family members because, like I said, after I had my son, I developed PTSD, which I didn't know that's what I was dealing with. Well, I'd probably always had PTSD. I've probably been struggling with PTSD since I was assaulted as a child. But, you know, there are triggers and things that happen in your life that bring you back to that situation and just re not re-traumatize you, but they just open up those boxes and there you are, you're back in it again. And it takes you a long time to recognize that that's what's happening to you. I know it took me an attempt to end my life to realize what was happening to me. So after that, my son got a little bit older and my class had graduated. They were, going off to do their thing, head off to college. And my life started getting better. My mental health started getting better, and I stopped being as depressed. And I didn't stop listening to that counselor, but I did start branching out to different counselors and different ways of believing, and even content creators that I could find here and there that kind of had a similar experience. Although nobody that I was finding had experiences to the extent that I had them. And I'm not saying that my life is so much more terrible than everybody else's and my experience is so much worse than everybody else's. It was just really hard for me to find people that were willing to get on the internet and talk about those experiences on the internet to total strangers. So it doesn't mean that they're not there. It just means that they're probably not as forthcoming with that kind of terribly shameful stuff. Well, things that they probably deem as shameful. Um, Sharing that with the internet, which is understandable. So now it's like 2018, and my son is a toddler, which was probably one of my favorite stages because you get to just go around and point stuff out and tell them that that's what it is and it exists, and you get to show them all these new things, and they get to experience all these things, and you vicariously through them experience it like it's the first thing ever. And that is so exciting. It's a very exciting period of time when you have children. Um, and this was the time where I started um, sort of reliving some of the traumatic events that had happened to me. I started kind of going through um, the traumatic experiences that I could remember, the ones that were at the forefront of my mind at that period of time, based on the things that I was being triggered by in my real life. So I started sort of processing them, and I still wasn't processing them great. Like, I couldn't, for a long time, I've been trying to talk about these things, but every time I go to try to talk about them, they get all jumbled up, and I can't remember them in exactly the order they were in or the exact timeline that they were in because I was always switching schools, I was always switching caregivers, I was always the whole world was always being switched up and turned around. So a lot of the stuff that happened to me, I remember what happened. I remember how it happened, but it takes me a very long time to recall, like when it happened. A lot of it's based on like grade levels, which isn't really helpful because during almost every year that I was in elementary school, I switched schools at least once every year. So it's really hard to order things when your life is that way. But I started trying to write things out, which was not working. I could not write. I could write for just a very short period of time before I got completely blocked out. And I would try to write, and I would just have these terrible, maybe they're anxiety attacks. I don't really know, but it just completely shuts me down because as I try to write it out, my brain's going every which direction, and I just can't get it out in a very cohesive way. So there would just be these pieces of notebook paper around my house that would just be parts of something that I tried to write down, that I got frustrated with, and then I just threw it. And then I would do it over and over and over again. And I would just have these terrible piles of these notebook pieces of paper where I've tried to write out this traumatic stuff that I just can't get through. So then I switched to coping mechanisms. And I started getting to, things that I had wanted to do when I was a kid that I didn't have the ability to do, like gardening for myself. That's what I really started doing. Um, and um, I grew up when by the woman that raised me. I grew up. Her house was it was part of her property actually. Um, was a community garden that I used to like to spend a lot of time in growing up. So um, I had a garden in my yard for the first time, and that was very exciting for me. It was very healing. I loved doing it. I wasn't very good at it. And by I wasn't very good at it, it wasn't that I couldn't grow things, and it wasn't that I couldn't grow them prolifically. It was that I had no idea what I was doing. So everything just sort of ended up in a big mess, an overwhelming mess, and I kind of shut down. But it was a wonderful experience. And I also went on my very first solo trip to go and see a grandmother that had left me in sixth grade. So it was my very first trip out of state, and I went by myself, and it was an insane experience. So, as I had sort of these positive experiences with sort of developing autonomy or being able to do things independently, like I had previously done before I left home and developed PTSD, um, I developed a higher ability to take in more information, harder information, and kind of receive it. And I began looking into common disorders that would appear in trauma survivors because I had come to terms with the fact that that's what I was. Um, and so I was looking into those disorders, and a lot of the ones I was coming across were um, personality disorders, which I had kind of assumed that if I were going to have an issue, it was going to be something that was going to be a prolonged thing that appeared in childhood because my um, my trauma was a prolonged thing that started in my childhood that followed me all the way up until I left home. And so I figured that if I was struggling with anything, it was going to be something that was associated along the lines of long-term trauma. So I was looking into personality disorders as a likely probably diagnosis that I would fit into. And so I started kind of trying to educate myself on different personality disorders and different trauma related illnesses. But also, I did this while getting into photography, while getting more into gardening, while sort of putting in place those coping mechanisms, and also taking back like my life and my childhood in a way, because I wasn't a child. I'm not a child now. But as an adult, one of the most powerful things that you can do to push through your trauma is to take back your childhood. All those things that you wanted as a child, all those things you wanted to do as a child, all the things you wanted to control as a child. As long as it's within reason, you can bring those things into your adult life. There is no problem with that. You can, if they wouldn't let you garden, you can garden. If they wouldn't let you control the way you dressed, you can control the way you dress. If they wouldn't let you um, have the autonomy to go out and go on adventures, you can do that. It's probably one of the most powerful things you can do is to slowly take back your childhood, bring it into your adult life, and make things different. Second only to doing those things for your own children. And the amazing thing about children when you are a trauma survivor is that you sort of get a do-over for yourself. And that's not the reason why you should have children, but you do kind of go on that journey back into childhood with your child, depending on in tune you are with your child. And you can sort of redo your childhood and look at yourself from like a very different perspective than you would probably if you had just went straight through into adulthood. So I put those coping mechanisms in place. I educated myself on trauma related illnesses, and I began to get, the vocabulary and various therapists and psychologists and things like that. I would listen to their videos and sort of compare them against things that I already knew to be true, because I was in the process of taking my experience and running through it and sort of synthesizing the things that I had experienced into a belief system, because that is kind of what you have to do. Um, so there were some things that I listened to where I was like, I can make that connection there. I've had enough experience where I could sort of tell whether something makes sense or whether it doesn't make sense. So if it comes in and I receive it and it connects to things, then I listen to that person more often than I don't listen to them, or more often than I would listen to other people. And through this process of time, I was able to make a lot of connections. And I don't know if I was healing. I'm not sure if I was healing or how much I was progressing. I was feeling better. I wasn't feeling nearly as depressed as I had before I left school, and then after I left school, and then after my class graduated. I wasn't feeling nearly as depressed as I was then, and I felt like I was beginning to get on solid ground again, because I felt like I sort of understood what was going on with me, and I could hear that other people had gone through those things too. And so it was the process of arming myself and developing coping mechanisms and understanding my experience that had begun to help me get my mental health on track. But that is not where it ends. That's just where it begins. And I'm going to close this video on that note. And there will be another one where I go over the second part of that.